Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi, and it's that time again. It's midweek, and I want you to play some Magic because you can win 2 rare or better ICRs in doing so. This week's midweek Magic is All Access Historic Singleton, and it really got me thinking about the renaissance of monocolor decks that we're seeing right now, really across every single format, and more specifically about the one color that's kind of been left out of this renaissance. While mono green is somewhat of a force in eternal formats, you're just not really seeing it across the board the way you are the other 5 monocolor options. And there's reasons for that, and it's important that we take a good hard look at that right about now. But before we get into all that, allow me to do the awkward thing and promote the channel. A while back, one of my viewers was kind enough to point out that we are the only channel putting out timely midweek Magic content. So be sure to subscribe right here at the Planeswalker Stronghold for all of your future midweek Magic needs, because we will be bringing you a deck list or strategy every single week. So what do you say we put all this aside and just get to that? So first, a very brief history lesson. Mono green has always owed its success to a series of 3-drop overpowered creatures that end up defining their individual standard formats to some degree. First off, we had Steel Leaf Champion. Then during the Ravnica period, we actually didn't have a mono green creature. We had green and something else variations, none of which ever really came to prominence quite the way the mono green options did. The following year, we had Lovestruck Beast, and then, of course, Old Growth Troll. Unfortunately, the current standard environment has been a little bit lacking in this area. The signature card to fit this pattern would be Topiary Stomper, and it's just never really found a home. Many of the cards from the Streets of New Capenna just did not perform as expected, and the set just did not have the overall impact on Standard that I think developers hoped. This has left mono green without a real monocolored deck since the fall rotation. But you guessed it, all of that is about to change. The brand new All Will Be One is bringing us a 3-mana 4/4 Phyrexian Beast that can only be described as pushed. Between the combination of Trample and Toxic and an on-board Proliferate trigger when it deals damage, this guy is a 1-man Wrecking Ball, bringing Toxic to your opponents, and is really reason enough to start developing mono green as a deck. One also gives us several other very good uncommons, a few very nice commons as well. All in all, green is getting a big push. So with that in mind, today I want to explore mono green in historic primarily, to give you some ideas of what else this color can do for you if you wish to develop in those directions. And first, just a couple of quick guidelines. In order to make this deck list give as much exposure for the less initiated players out there, I have opted to not include cards from Standard or Alchemy, or anything that has been in the new player experience really ever through the history of Arena. And in particular to try and avoid cards really that rotated into historic within the last year or two. All in all, I did end up making at least one exception on this, but this was my thinking as we go into the deck list. All right, now that we've got those guidelines established, let's take a good look at the deck list. And I'm going to start at the end with just the mana base here. Castle Garenbrig is one of those green accelerator rare lands. Very good and well worth some consideration if you're into green. The Labyrinth is one of those cards, particularly if you're interested in Brawl, to very strongly consider owning at least one copy of. This is basically a fixed Maze of Ith and does a very good job of being a role filler. And especially in a deck like this, where having one colorless land is not really going to hurt your mana base whatsoever, it is practically an auto include. Jumping down to the beginning of the curve here, we've got a couple good accelerators. Gilded Goose obviously creates mana for us, but also can help us create food tokens and give us a life gain option if we need it. Land of War Elves is the classic turn 1 accelerator. The other classic turn 1 elf that you see in more aggressive decks is Pelt Collector. He basically gets bigger every time you drop a bigger creature because he's competitive. And from there, we've got a nice 1-drop wall, a 0/3 defender with the option to draw a card later on in the game. Prey Upon is a very nice, efficient removal piece. It is sorcery speed, but it allows your creatures to double as removal for you. Stonecoil Serpent is here at the lower end. Obviously, he has an X casting cost, so you probably are not casting him for 1, although there may very well be reasons to do so. This is the only creature in the deck that is not definitively green. Its keyword abilities of Reach and Trample, as well as protection for multicolor, really make this a powerhouse creature, particularly when you can drop it with a ridiculous amount of mana behind it. Primal Might, another good multifunction X spell here. Target creature you control gets +X/+X until end of turn. Then it fights up to one target creature you don't control. So playing this on something like a trample creature really allows it to do double duty. Very, very nice. From there, at the 2-drop slot, we've got one of the few commons in the deck, Elvish Visionary. This is just a card you don't see a whole lot in people's collections. And for a common, giving you a reasonable 1/1 body for 2 and drawing a card is pretty darn efficient card draw for green. From there, we've got Explore, another one of the commons. You may play an additional land this turn, draw a card. It's just acceleration and card draw. Gotta love it. Heroic Intervention. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. This is just a really nice answer to those almost inevitable wrath effects that you will see in the Eternal formats. From here, we've got one of the few legendary creatures in this deck, Jarrell, and a human druid for 2 mana gives you a 1/2. When you draw your second card each turn, create a 2/2 green cat creature token. We've seen card draw is already a bit of a focus in this deck because green needs some of that. For 4 and 2 green, until end of turn, creatures you control have base power and toughness of XX, where X is the number of cards in your hand. So you can turn that card draw into board presence and hopefully alpha strike for some win. Ram Through. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. If the creature you control has trample, excess damage is dealt to the creature's controller instead. Just a very nice straight up removal because it's not even really a fight spell. And the fact that you can pour over damage onto your opponent makes it a very good piece of utility removal for green. 2 net mana and instant speed. Scavenger Ooze, 1 colorless, 1 green, and you get a 2/2 body for that. You can pay a green as many times as you want in a given turn. Exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, put a +1/+1 counter on Scavenger Ooze, and you gain a life. really becomes a threat and allows you to deal with graveyard recursion strategies. Setson's Training is one of those classic green auras, and one of the few auras that I think is really useful. When it ETBs, you draw a card, so it automatically replaces itself, and as such is not really subject to the inherent card disadvantage that auras are so often plagued by. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has trample. We've seen a couple of places already where trample is very useful to our green creatures. Here we've got our last piece of land, a modal land, in fact. And of course, it also has the option of casting it as an accelerator, a 2-mana 1/1 tap for green elemental creature. Next up, we've got Wall of Blossoms, 2-mana 0/4 defender. When it ETBs, draw a card, more card advantage. In Search of Greatness, this is the one card that I kind of broke the rule on. This was not included in the new player experience, but it is from Kaldheim. I think it's powerful enough in mono green that it was worth considering. For 2 mana, it's an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a permanent spell from your hand with mana value equal to 1, plus the highest mana value among other permanents you control, without paying its mana cost. If you don't, you get to scry 1. So if you don't have a card worth casting, it helps you get to a better card. One of those few commons and uncommons in the deck is Cultivate. 3 mana, sorcery speed, search your library for up to 2 basic lands, reveal those, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped, the other into your hand. 3 mana at sorcery speed, it's worth taking turn 3 off sometimes to make sure, one, that you're accelerating, and basically that on turn 4 you're able to drop a 5, maybe even a 6 or 7 drop, depending upon what you've done with your other turns. Very solid card, even though it's only an uncommon. Likewise, Llanowar Visionary, 3 mana for a 2/2 elf. When it ETBs, you draw a card once again, and he taps for a green mana. Lovestruck Beast is one of those 3-drop overpowered green cards. For 3, typically you would expect a 3 power toughness creature. Here, not only are you getting a 5/5, but you also have the advantage of an adventure, giving you a bit of pseudo card advantage. The one downside here is it cannot attack unless you control a 1/1 creature, like the human token that you make in its Heart's Desire adventure. Even if it can't attack, the lovely thing is it can still block. Garrick's Harbinger, another form of pseudo card advantage in the fact that it tutors. It's hexproof from black, which can be pretty nice against those black dot removal dot decks. 3 mana for a 4/3, so it's a little overpowered on its base stats, and we like that. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, look at that many cards from the top of your library. You may reveal a creature card or Garruk Planeswalker card from among them and put it to your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So as you may have guessed, not only does this help you pseudo-tutor up creatures, but we have a Garruk in the deck. Another one of our legendaries, this one at Mythic, 3 mana 2/3 Selva, Elf Scout. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. This just gets to be just ridiculous card draw and acceleration, but do keep in mind it will also trigger for your opponents, so if they're staying on curve, they're getting that same advantage. So what you want to do is very aggressively be attacking and forcing them to block, so that this ends up being more of a one-sided trick. Second clause on this particular card: for a green and tap, add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures. So you use your lands, play a big creature, then tap this to generate more mana based on your recently entered bigger creature that drew you a card as well. and then you're able to play that card off of the secondary mana or do any of your other things. Steel Leaf Champion, this is another one of those previously mentioned overpowered 3-drops in green. This time a 5/4. Cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Conditional blocking really comes into play very nicely for green. And this is one of the oldest examples of these overpowered 3-drops on Arena. Another is Yorvo, 3 mana 0/0 legendary creature. When it enters the battlefield, put 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever another green creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Yorvo. So this continues to grow and get bigger, feeding things like Selva, even when the new creature is not necessarily bigger than the existing. Then if that creature's power is greater than Yorvo's power, put another +1/+1 counter on Yorvo. Just adding to that cumulative board state powerhouse. Heraldic Banner is one of those really staple uncommons in the Eternal format, and definitely something that if you're into Brawl, having a copy of this is very, very good. When it ETBs, choose a color. Creatures of the chosen color that you control get +1/+0, and you can tap it for 1 mana of said chosen color. Obviously, this is most powerful in a monocolored deck. Similarly, the Monument cycles, in this case for green, creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. Obviously, pumping up a creature for a short term is very, very good. Giving it trample makes it less likely or less efficient to block. And we've already talked about how trample can be beneficial in this deck. From here, we go to the 4-drops, and we hit one of the signature Eternal cards on Arena. I'd say there's a very good argument to make here that this is one of the most powerful cards and most played cards in the Eternal formats. It's an absolute staple. 4 mana instant. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. Put up to 2 creature cards with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And as you notice, the majority of this deck is 3 or less. So you're very likely to hit not just 1 creature here, but 2. And that's just ridiculous board state advantage. More card draw. Guardian Project, a 4 mana enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature ETBs under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control, or in your graveyard, draw a card. Obviously, we're playing Singleton this week, so this is going to hit pretty much all the time. And if this stays on the board for very long, if your opponent is not able to answer this enchantment, you are going to bury them under card advantage. And another staple to absolutely consider for any sort of green brawl play. It should just about be included in every single deck. Outmuscle is another piece of spot removal. This time 4 mana and sorcery makes it a little less desirable, but don't worry, it has some upsides. Put a +1 counter on target creature you control, then it fights target creature you don't control. Keyword Adamant. If at least 3 green mana was spent to cast this spell, and that's almost always going to be the case, the creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. Very, very nice to get a one-sided removal piece here out of a fight spell, and that Adamant, like I said, is almost guaranteed. Vizier of the Menagerie, 4 mana, 3/4, Cleric Naga. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast creature spells from the top of your library. You may spend mana as though or mana of any type to cast creature spells. That last clause, of course, is a little less important in this mono green deck, but this just allows you to just drop your library theoretically onto the board. The one issue that you'll have here is eventually you'll run into a land, but more than likely you will run out of mana before you hit more land. Beast Whisperer, another classic elf, 4 mana, 2/3, so a little underpowered, but he makes up for it in the card draw ability, because whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card. No other condition on this whatsoever. Here we've got Garruk Unleashed. We kind of teased the Planeswalker Garruk earlier. 4 mana and 4 loyalty. Its -2 ability allows it to create a green beast token, so you're creating board state right away. And even post-Wrath, you're able to protect it. Its +1 ability gives a target creature +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. I think we've covered that ad nauseum. And then if you get to its -7 ultimate, you get an emblem at the beginning of your end step. You may search your library for a creature card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. I think that's a classic win more ultimate. I think by the time you get this up to 7, you have probably already won the game. To finish out the 4-drop slot, we've got the mythic legendary creature questing beast of 4/4 vigilance, death touch, haste. Hey, I heard you like keywords. It cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Combat damage that would be dealt to creatures you control cannot be prevented, and combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control cannot be prevented. Fog all you want to. When it deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to a Planeswalker as well. That's really, really nice. God Eternal Uranus, Zombie God, 5 mana, 5/5 with Death Touch. This makes all of your fight spells just absolutely insanely good, no matter how big their threat is. When it ETBs, double the power of each other creature you control until end of turn. Those creatures gain vigilance, so you can take a 0-cost Alpha Strike swing at your opponent with double power. Like most gods, when it dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it in its owner's library, 3rd from the top. And again, because of the amount of card draw that we're seeing in this deck, particularly for a green deck, you can very quickly potentially get back around to that. And from there, we've got our second Planeswalker in the deck, Nissa, who shakes the world, 5 mana, 5 loyalty. Whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green mana, because, doubling your mana production is pretty darn good. +1 ability, put 3 +1/+1 counters on a target non-creature land you control and tap it. It becomes a 1/1 elemental creature with vigilance and haste. It's still a land. And then the ultimate on this, again, a bit of a win more in a deck like Big Dumb Green, but it will happen on occasion. For 8 loyalty, you get an emblem with lands you control have indestructible. Search your library for any number of forest cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Basically, if you didn't win that turn, you're going to win next turn. Just really absurd stuff. Crater Hoof Behemoth, easy for me to say. This is an 8 mana 5/5 beast with haste. When it ETBs, creatures you control gain trample and +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. This guy doesn't even really have to swing himself, but of course he can because of haste. But for 8 mana, which oftentimes you can get off on turn 5 or turn 6, he is alpha striking the board for the win. Creatures having trample and +X/+X equal to your wide is kind of ridiculous. Something that you'll often play far earlier than its actual mana cost. Legendary Artifact, the Great Henge. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And remember, we've got cards like Yorvo out here that just keep getting bigger. You'll very easily be able to cast this for 2 mana. Not on turn 2, of course, but certainly on turn 5, you'll drop this for 2 mana, immediately tap it for 2 green, gain 2 life, so you basically played this for free. And whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. Absurdity. And that brings us back around to the mana base. What's that? You didn't catch all that? Well, Matt would like you to know that any deck list applicable to this video can be found down in the doobly-doo. Hey, let's not forget, the whole reason to participate in these totally free midweek Magic events is the prize support is awesome. And don't forget, if this video gets just 10 likes by 8 p.m. tonight on the day of release, I will be live playing this on my Twitch channel. And with all that having been said, don't forget, smash that like button like Ronnie J would. And until next time, I'll see you in the arena.